The Airbus they flew on was just one of dozens of aircraft that once belonged to mainstream European and U.S. aviation companies, then were passed through a web of intermediary companies and offshore firms to Middle Eastern airlines subject to U.S. sanctions moves that Washington alleges are helping Syria bypass the sanctions. It also provides a glimpse of the methods used to send private Russian military contractors to Syria, a deployment the Kremlin insists does not exist. Russian officials say Moscow's presence is limited to airstrikes, training of Syrian forces, and small numbers of special forces troops. The issue of military casualties is highly sensitive in Russia, where memories linger of operations in Chechnya and Afghanistan that dragged on for years. Friends and relatives of the contractors suspect Moscow is using the private fighters in Syria because that way it can put more boots on the ground without risking regular soldiers, whose deaths have to be accounted for. Trying to choke off Assad's access to aircraft to sustain his military campaign against rebels, Assad and his allies in Russia, Iran and the Hezbollah militia need access to civilian aircraft to fly in men and supplies. Washington has tried to choke off access to the aircraft and their parts through export restrictions on Syria and Iran and through Treasury Department sanctions blacklisting airlines in those countries. The Treasury Department has also blacklisted several companies outside Syria, accusing them of acting as middlemen. These actions demonstrate our resolve to target anyone who is enabling Assad and his regime, John E. Smith, director of the Treasury Department's Office of Foreign Assets Control, said in testimony to a congressional committee in November. In recent years, dozens of planes have been registered in Ukraine to two firms, Syrias and Dart, that were founded by a former Soviet Marine major and his one-time military comrades, according to the Ukraine National Aircraft Register. The planes were then sold or leased and ended up being operated by Iranian and Syrian airlines, according to the flight tracking data. One of the companies, Syrias, and the former Marine major, Sergei Tomchany, have been on a U.S. Commerce Department blacklist since 2011 for allegedly exporting aircraft to Iran and Syria without obtaining licenses from Washington. In September, the U.S. Treasury Department added Syrias and Dart to its sanctions blacklist, saying they were helping sanctioned airlines procure aircraft. Syrias and Dart, as well as Tomchany, have denied any wrongdoing related to supplying planes to sanctioned entities. In January 2015, the aircraft was removed from the Irish register, said a spokesman for the Irish Aviation Authority, which administers the register. For the next 2 months, the aircraft, which carried the identification number EIDXY, vanished from national registers before showing up on the aircraft register in Ukraine. The Ukrainian register gave its new owner as Gresham Marketing Limited, which is registered in the British Virgin Islands. The owners of the company are two Ukrainians, Viktor Romanica and Nikolai Saverchenko, according to corporate documents leaked from the Panamanian law firm Mossack Fonseca. Ukrainian business records show they are managers in small local businesses. Contacted by phone, Romanica said he knew nothing and hung up. Saverchenko couldn't be reached by phone and didn't respond to a letter delivered to the address listed for him. In March 2015, Gresham leased EIDXY to Dart, according to the Ukrainian aircraft register. The identification number was changed to a Ukrainian number, or CNU. On August 20, 2015, Syrias became the aircraft's operator, the register showed. A representative of the Ukraine State Aviation Service said the register was not intended as official confirmation of ownership but that there had been no complaints about the accuracy of its information. 4 lawyers specializing in U.S. export rules say that transactions involving aircraft that end up in Iran or Syria carry significant risks for Western companies supplying the planes or equipment. Even if they had no direct dealings with a sanctioned entity, the companies supplying the aircraft can face penalties or restrictions imposed by the U.S. government, the lawyers said. The lawyers, however, said that the legal exposure for aircraft makers such as Boeing and Airbus was minimal, because the trade involves second-hand aircraft that are generally more than 20 years old, and the planes had been through a long chain of owners before ending up with operators subject to sanctions. war zone flights. In the 90-minute meeting, he denied providing aircraft to Iran or Syria. Instead, he said, Syrias and Dart had provided aircraft to third parties, which he did not identify. Those third parties, he said, supplied the planes onto the end users. We did not supply aircraft to Iran, Tom Chaney, a man of military bearing in his late 50s, said as he sipped herbal tea. We have nothing to do with supplying aircraft to Cham Wings. Neither Dart nor Syrias could have sold or leased aircraft to Cham Wings because they were not the owners of the aircraft, he said. Syrias flew cargoes in Angola for the Angolan government and defense ministry and aid agencies during its civil war. Tom Chaney said his companies also operated flights in Iraq after the invasion in 2003, transporting private security contractors. He did say, however, that the people listed at the time of the interview in Ukraine's business register as the owners of the two companies were merely proxies. One of the owners in the register was a mid-ranking Syrias executive, one was an 81-year-old accountant for several Kiev firms, and another was someone with the same name and address as a librarian from Melitopol in southeast Ukraine. According to the business register, the owner of 25% in Syrias is someone called Vladimir Suchkov. The address listed for him in the register is number 33, Elektrikov Street, Kiev. That's the same address as the one listed in Ukrainian government procurement documents for military unit No. A0515, which comes under the command of the Ukrainian Defense Ministry's main intelligence directorate. Tom Chaney said he and Suchkov were old acquaintances. He wasn't a bad specialist, Tom Chaney said. A young lad, but not bad. He said he believed Suchkov was living in Russia. On January 9 this year, Dart changed its name to Alana, and listed a new address and founders, according to the Ukrainian Business Register. On March 1, a new company, Alana Air, took over Alana's assets and liabilities, the register showed. Contractors come back in caskets. Although Moscow denies it is sending private military contractors to Syria, plenty of people say that's untrue. Among them are dozens of friends and former colleagues of the fighters and people associated with the firm that recruits the men, a shadowy organization known as Wagner with no offices, not even a brass plaque on a door. Russia has 2,000 to 3,000 contractors fighting in Syria, said Yevgeny Shabayev, local leader of a paramilitary organization in Russia who is in touch with some of the men. In a single battle in February this year, about 300 contractors were either killed or wounded, according to a military doctor and two other sources familiar with the matter. A Russian private military contractor who has been on 4 missions to Syria said he arrived there on board a Cham Wings flight from Rostov. The flights were the main route for transporting the contractors, said the man, who asked to be identified only by his first name, Vladimir. He said the contractors occasionally use Russian military aircraft too, when they can't all fit on the Cham Wings jets. Our understanding is that these are contractors, said an employee who said he assisted with boarding for several of the Syria flights. He pointed to their destination, the fact there were no women among them and that they carried military-style rucksacks. He spoke on condition of anonymity, saying he wasn't authorized to speak to the media. Interviews with relatives of contractors killed in Syria also indicate the A320 flights to Rostov are used to transport Russian military contractors. The widow of one contractor killed in Syria said the last time she spoke to her husband by phone was on January 21 last year, the same day, according to flight tracking data, that a Cham Wings charter flew to Syria. He called on the evening of the 21st. There were men talking and the sound of walkie-talkies. And by the 22nd he was already not reachable. Only text messages were reaching him, said the woman, who had previously visited her husband at a training camp for the contractors in southern Russia. The widows of 2 other contractors killed in Syria described how their husbands' bodies arrived back home. Like the first widow, they spoke on condition of anonymity. They said representatives of the organization that recruited their husbands warned of repercussions if they spoke to the media. Syrian government forces then come into the town and raise their flags, he told her, taking credit for the victory.